The African American Legend series highlights the accomplishments of blacks in areas as varied as politics, sports, aviation, business, literature, and religion. We will explore how African Americans have succeeded in areas where they'd been previously excluded because of segregation, racism, and lack of opportunity. I'm your host, Dr. Roscoe C. Brown, Jr., and joining us on today's program is Reverend Herbert Daughtry, pastor of the House of the Lord Church in Brooklyn, one who's made many contributions to the African American community and has recently published a very interesting and thoughtful book entitled No Monopoly on Suffering, which describes the many roles that Reverend Daughtry has played in the struggles of blacks and Jews in New York City. So, Herb, congratulations on publishing the book. What is the main message you're trying to get across in this book?
Twofold. One is a vindication of me. I was under severe smear campaign, and what I wanted to do was to indicate what really happened. I wanted to do this because I have many friends across this wide spectrum of religion and national origin, and I wanted to make sure that the truth was there. Second, I wanted to show what changes could be accomplished even by a handful of people who set out with a very clear agenda and hopefully will inspire people to go and do likewise.
You've been in the venue in the fields for a long, long time.
40 years.
As an activist, you come from a religious family, the church and your father and so on, and you're someone who's admired by many in the African American and the larger community.
Yes.
But you're also someone who's taken your share of brickbats because of the strong stands that you have taken. Some of them have tended to suggest anti-Semitism, which everyone who knows you is not true.
Right.
But some of these things have come about as you have tried, and others have tried to protest some of the indignities that African Americans have faced, particularly at the hands of the police and at the hands of the public establishment.
Yes.
In the book, you use, I guess, Crown Heights as the main symbol of this.
Yes.
This is something that unfortunately has become a symbol throughout the country as symbolic of deterioration of relations between blacks and Jews.
Yes.
Why don't you take it from there and talk about when it started, how it started, and what your role and the role of others was.
In Crown Heights, where presently you have a Hasidic community, the Bavitcher Hasidic community, representing about 10% of the population, and therefore you have 90% people of African ancestry. For a long time, we observed the Hasidic community slowly coming into the community. As they came out, and significantly, even other Jews left. More and more, they began to assert themselves, sometimes violently, in the takeover of the community. The district line was redrawn.
That's the district line for the schools or for the politics?
For the community. The Planning Board District 8 and 9 was redrawn in a way so as to enhance the political potential of that community. For a long time, people struggled against that. I became involved intensely in 1977 when a young lad named Victor Rhodes, 15 years old, had been savagely beaten by 30 to 50 members of that community. And we organized demonstrations. In the process, what happened is that I became labeled as anti-Semitic. I wanted to show in the book is that that's a tactic used so often by some Jews in order to divert attention. We were struggling for justice, for fairness, and somehow we get to be labeled anti-Semitic by people who have no history of coalescing with anybody, not even other Jews, to achieve a broader social objective. Obviously, these allegations were not true, and what happened, even with respect to David Dinkins, our mayor, is that this was used even to defeat David Dinkins. It was so hypocritical because when the uprising occurred, rebellion occurred, 91, August 1991, for several days. Dave Dinkins, the mayor, was applauded for the way he handled the situation. The West Indian Day Parade, which is Labor Day in September, Labor Day, the Hasidic leaders and the mayor, David Dinkins, and other black leaders marched together, and everybody applauded that this was a show of unity. David Dinkins had handled the job, the situation with great competence and compassion, and there was editorials commending him. When Yankel Rosenbaum, who had been killed, the alleged killer, although he's been convicted now, was freed by the jury, that community turned on David Dinkins and began to say he was responsible, he left the community unprotected, and they projected this to the point that people were writing blacks against Jews. And through their intimidation, I'm thinking of the city community and their influence, they even brought other Jewish leaders, highly regarded, highly respected, some of them my friends, into this attack and to the characterization of this situation in Crown Heights as though it was now all blacks against all Jews.
Now the flashpoint, as you described, was the death of Yankel Rosenbaum, who had been stabbed in one of the altercations on the street.
Right.
But later information revealed that he didn't die from the stab wound per se, because the Mayor Dinkins actually went and talked with him in the hospital.
Right.
But he died because of inappropriate care, in that whoever was caring for him didn't note that he was bleeding from his back, and he died of loss of blood.
Right.
Which really is unfortunate and certainly needs to be addressed, but that was not a function of lack of caring on the part of the police or the part of David Dinkins.
Right.
And then you get people recreating history by saying that they saw Hasidics being beaten by blacks and the police standing by. I personally, as you know, was in Crown Heights for 4 or 5 of those days, walking with the community leaders, talking with both blacks and Jews. I never saw anything like that.
No.
And practically no one else did, except those who chose to write about it.
Right. And it had, you're absolutely right, because I was there from the beginning, from the very first night. I was there when the stones were being thrown. And there were stones coming off roofs, too. And the difference, of course, there was not a Hasid that was arrested. All of the rest, something like 90, took place within the black community.
Of course, the pivotal event that started this was young Gavin Cato being killed in an automobile accident by someone who's driving the Rebbe.
Yes.
And the way that was handled, I don't think it was intentionally, but the Rebbe was taken one way and the young boy was taken another way, and by the time he got to the hospital, he was dead.
Right.
And the community began to ask questions. And then these other tensions that you talked about that underlay this, the previous favoritism that was supposedly occurred. And of course, you know, they had commissions and they looked at it, etc. And in many instances, you became the whipping boy.
Yes.
Because you and Reverend Al Sharpton were among the leaders who were actually speaking. On the other hand, there were many other leaders, such as myself, who were there working with you and with the community. And remember, we had the meeting with the Luboviches, and we talked about how it would heal the community. And that was about 3 or 4 days afterwards. And we were working toward that. We worked toward having a peaceful Labor Day parade, which we had. And then later, those who had, I believe, political concerns about having Dave Dinkins as mayor, black mayor, began to use these others to foment this discontent.
That's absolutely. That's precisely correct, and that's what I wanted to get across in the book, is that it was used. There were scapegoats. I was one. They used me because you know what I decided. I decided I wouldn't say anything. I only made 2 very brief statements, all recorded, and because I knew they were going to do this, and I set myself up that when they come, the Lord delivered them into my hand, because I could document what I said. And sure enough, I was the scapegoat.
Why
but
do you think they made you the scapegoat?
Well, number one, to divert from the issues that were being raised. The issues that were being raised, I've been raising, I document in the book for years and years. And I'm the one who called for federal investigation, still call for federal investigation. Why don't we have an outside impartial agency, a federal agency, come in and investigate this whole area? Been saying that for the longest. But the other thing was it was a political year. They did the same thing with the Korean community. Because this man who was accused of assaulting this woman, and I was called in on that when it happened, went down, talked to this man who was Korean.
To give the audience the background, it was a store owned by Koreans, and there's some dispute about paying a bill.
A woman, and a woman eventually was assaulted, and I was called in. Took some ministers there with me. The man was so arrogant, I had to hold back one of the ministers. But if I had not had so much to do, I probably led a demonstration myself, but I didn't. We warned the man, thought that that would be sufficient. Some other people decided that they wanted to do more about it. The same people who were saying blacks against Jews, Dinkins isn't doing anything, now began to say blacks against Koreans. And there was just one store. One store, all Korean stores were flourishing as they'd always been. But again, it was a political year. So people used these two incidents, heightened them to now say blacks against Jews, blacks against Koreans, and David Dinkins is the blame. And he took a hit for it, when in fact he should not have. So it was not only a diversion away from looking at the real issues, but there was so much at stake in the political arena at that time.
The title of your book is No Monopoly on Suffering. And that alludes to the fact that sometimes blacks and sometimes Jews suggest that our Holocaust or their Holocaust is worse than the other.
Yes.
And that somehow or another one needs to be given more benefit than the other.
Yes.
And you have gone to great length to point out that there have been tragedies in oppressions in both of these communities.
That's right.
Now, pick that up in terms of your interaction with some of the people in the Jewish community who understand your position, and some in the black community who may misunderstand your position.
Right. And if I may, by way of introduction, because I've already been accused of using the title as an insult to Jews, you know. But the title was employed by others who asked us to come together to try to think through how we could establish solidarity. And I might add, by the way, is that I had visited Sachsenhausen, the prison, one of the first concentration camps in what was then the German Democratic Republic, had gone up to Schwerin, northern Germany, where there was a memorial and where Hitler was going to march Jews and others into the sea. And I had left there, had gone to Belfast, come through the airport, never will forget it, and getting ready to go up to Belfast, and the Britisher looked at me and he said, "You're not going up there to convert them, are you?" You know, and it was kind of disconcerting, disorienting, because now here was this Britisher white, somehow it roped me into his club to be against other whites, you know, in Belfast, against them. I reflected a long time as I walked the street of Belfast. I sat in Sinn Féin's headquarters. I went up there. Bobby Sands, we had a memorial up there. Bobby Sands and the Irish leaders who were starving themselves to death. And so when I returned, I was invited to discuss this. And so coming out of that experience, in our delegation, we had a Native American, we had a Puerto Rican, we had a Chicano, we had a Jew, and myself. So we spent many hours just discussing our various sufferings, and so and so I attempted to give some thought as to what we could need to learn from our individual experiences, and how we could use them to build solidarity in a way that it would not happen again. And so I think about 7 or 8 points I make about learning each other's experience. Appreciating each other's experience and why each other is sensitive to that particular experience, and be careful that we don't get into an upmanship, be careful that we don't get into an argument on words, and that we should come together more frequently to look at the history of the time that it happened, And if we can do this, then it may be that if we could build solidarity out of this experience and not get isolated on who has the most scars, it may be that our collective suffering can indeed, number one, prevent this kind of experience from ever happening again, and maybe build a better relationship.
As a clergy person, you have a deep spiritual insight. I've been to your church, and I know just how you reach your constituents, and I've been to affairs and non-sectarian affairs where your spiritualism comes through. At the same time, Herbert Daughtry is a great basketball player.
Yes, that's right, that's right. I take great pride in my basketball prowess.
He's a combative guy, and he has a great political insight.
Right.
And one of the history of our community, the African community, is the relationship between the church and our political struggle.
Right, that's right.
And of course, the great Martin Luther King, we all recognize, but people like Wyatt Walker and Gardner Taylor, Adam Powell,
right.
The relationship between the political and the religious. And sometimes that causes a problem with your fellow religious brothers.
Right.
Because they say, well, why don't you just leave, you take care of praying and let them do the politics. But that's not the real world.
No, certainly
that
not.
really isn't the real world. So that many times in these conflicts, you find Reverend Herbert Daughtry being criticized because you criticize an individual who may be of a certain background, and you've been criticized by blacks and Jews
and everybody.
And as of anyone who's taken a stand. The problem, of course, is that sometimes the criticism becomes too personal.
Yeah, right.
And they don't understand the person behind the issue.
Right.
One thing that I think a number of people admire, and I think you've described in the book, is that you do really try to explain the issue.
Right.
For example, in the book you point up, if you say that someone made a remark and they are of a particular ethnic group, and it's a negative remark, your opposition isn't against that entire group.
Right.
It is against what that individual is saying.
That's right. That's
now,
right.
along these lines, the book has a lot to do with your correspondence and interaction with the famous mayor, Mayor Ed Koch.
Yes.
Who, as you know, is a very colorful and himself committed person.
Right, right.
He's also very quick with his tongue.
That's right. That's right.
And you're pretty skillful with yours.
Right, right.
Now, tell us about the relationship between Reverend Herbert Daughtry and Mayor Ed Koch.
Well, he's an interesting character, and the letters, I insisted, I'd argue with my publisher about keeping the letters in. I wanted people to see that what I was saying publicly, I said privately.
Yeah. That's a very fine addition to the book, by the way.
Oh, thank you, because I went around and around with my publisher about it. But Koch, we met Koch when he became mayor, and our introduction to him was a young lad named Randy Evans had been killed by a police officer named Robert Daughtry in November of 1976. 1977, the jury pretty much acquitted him, said he had psychomotor epileptic seizure. So Koch came to office, and then 78 he held an inaugural at the Brooklyn Museum. And we couldn't get a hearing. Nobody was hearing. This young lad had been killed, couldn't get a hearing. We was in a lame duck political year. And so we launched the Black Christmas 77 as an economic tactic to get attention. We wanted justice. And so when Koch came to Brooklyn, I snatched the mic. I wouldn't let him talk. So when he came, I said, no, you can't speak in Brooklyn until you address this issue. And it so startled him. And well, we always had a lot of people, you know, we were very good at the organizing. So he said, what do you want? All we want to do is talk. You know, you know, I'm clergy and everything. We just want to sit down and have a talk about a young lad that was killed. He said, oh, is that what you say? Fine, okay. So he said, let's meet. I said, when? He said, 2 weeks. Fine. And we met. We were the first group to meet with him, and we thought we were off on great footing because he claimed to be independent and et cetera, et cetera.
If I recall correctly, I was at that meeting.
You
I
were.
recall that.
You, David Dinkins,
right.
Basil Patterson.
That's right.
That's right.
Mayor.
And we had a very cordial meeting.
Right.
We had a press conference later, talked about looking forward to these years of positive relationship with the mayor. But it soured in time, and we became staunch.
Did it sour because of personality or because of ideology?
I think it was ideology, yeah, because I found him likable at times. I mean, at times, maybe few and far between, and so I kind of think we had kind of got into what a kind of maybe hidden kind of admiration for some of the qualities that, as you had pointed out, his toughness, hard work, he's smart. But there are other qualities, of course, that I disagreed with, and so we had this.
Well, don't you think that part of this difference with you and Mayor Koch and some of his supporters had to do with, I use the word, self destiny, turf. Recall at those times, this was just after the Civil Rights Movement, the black community was struggling mightily for political independence.
Yeah, right.
And some element of not having political independence was the unfairness of the police,
right?
The weakness in the schools.
That's right.
The discourtesy in some of the social service agencies.
That's right.
And I guess as the mayor, Koch felt a necessity to defend that. We're in the 1990s now, almost year 2000. I believe that he and many people who had that position, that blacks should not speak for themselves, should not be in control of certain things, understand that was probably a retrogressive position.
Yeah.
Because as the city changes in its complexion and color and demographics, everybody is going to have some say for their community.
Yes, yes. And he had a way of speaking that alienated people because he called people
because to be fair about it, he alienated many people in the white community too.
Yeah, oh yeah, yeah. He was surely democratic about creating enemies. I mean, he created. Well, he was more intensely in his effort toward some of us, but he. I mean, he was everybody. He'd created enemies all over the place. But if I may go back, I guess what toughened me, as you alluded to, was the criticism to which I was subjected by my own colleagues. When I felt called to the ministry, I thought I had a special mission. Now keep in mind, I'm talking about, this is my 40th year. So we're talking about 1958. And I thought that in addition to being fundamental in my theology, I believe in a personal encounter with God, all of that conservative religion kind of thing. But I thought that we needed to find a way to make our message applicable within a cultural history situation. That is, the Europeanization of Christianity had alienated, you know, many blacks, particularly young blacks, and in addition to then bringing the African dimension to Christianity, which I think is historically accurate as well as theologically accurate, there was also the struggle dimension. King is venerated now, but you know, when he started, he had a whole lot of problems.
So my struggle was a communist.
That's right. So that my struggle at that time and special mission was to find how can you make our very personal faith applicable to the political situation. And by politics, I mean the full range of things that people do to struggle for human rights and self-determination for their own people first, and of course for the rest of the world. So people around me didn't understand that. You know, they didn't understand me demonstrating, boycotting, talking black, you know, making references to biblical characters as being African, because we were a little uncomfortable with those terms. We were just coming out of the Negro and colored stages. So I was, in fact, on the radio, I mean, they used to excoriate me on the same broadcast that I would have. I'd have some of my preacher friends following with all kinds of excoriations. And then what has happened, and I'm very grateful, is that many of these preachers have come to the church where I pastor and have admitted that they were wrong, you know, that and take us through as to why they thought they were wrong. And so in that sense, I guess I can say, Teehee, you know, God has allowed me to live long enough to see a position vindicated, and that's not always the case. And being now another thing we share in common, Dr. Brown, and of course it's always been a delight and to see you always on the firing line, you all over the place, man, is that I think we share this eternal youthfulness. People don't really know our real ages.
That's right. Talk about it. That's the reason why I run and you play basketball.
That's right.
That's exactly right.
That's right.
Well, the struggle keeps you healthy, but let's look at the future. Everybody talking about the millennium. African Americans have gone a long way. We've had good middle class, our kids get good education, South Africa is free, etc. But at the same time, we have a large number of people who still are in poverty, particularly in urban communities. Our relations with other communities are, I would say, at a kind of a neutral level. We have colleagues, but we don't fight as much, but we still haven't gotten together in that dream that King talked about, all of us playing and working together. What's your vision for this country and for Black America?
Right. Well, I first of all, I have to say, and quoting Bishop Tutu, I'm addicted to hope. I'm high on hope. I try to be realistic, though, and so I look forward to a future in which we will reach the promised land. The dream will be realized. That groups will work together to build that kind of America as is articulated in its pronouncements. I want to believe and still work toward a coalition, a people of goodwill working together. I believe, I'm nationalist. I believe that I quote Rabbi Hilliard's statement, if I'm not for myself, who will be for me? If I'm only for myself, however, then what am I? So, and some of the things we do, we still meet with various groups and still talk together. I think the president's attempt to bring about this panel, and that's a move in the right direction. And so I'm hopeful as we keep working together. And finally, there is a divine dimension about what we do. God has a way of putting a wrinkle in history, and so with that kind of faith, I look forward to the future.
And we've been talking with Reverend Herbert Daughtry at House of the Lord Church about his very insightful book, No Monopoly on Suffering. Thanks, Herb Daughtry, for being with us today.
Good to be with you, man. Always, always, whether it's in the street, classroom, or sitting here.